4 years ago, our home's curb appeal was bland. We had overgrown gardens, our deck and furniture had seen better days, and everything just needed some love. And today, I'm gonna show you the 7 projects I did to reclaim our outdoor space and make it our own personal oasis. And along the way, I saved over $13,000 doing it myself versus paying a contractor. I'm gonna show you exactly how I did it, how you can too. Today I'm going to transform this boring bed in our front yard to give it some more structure with a retaining wall and a nice raised bed look. So the first thing to do is grab a string line and some stakes and to string it out and find out what the actual drop is from one side to the other, then we can start planning out the wall. So I came down to the other end of the bed and I'm right at the edge of the porch here, and that's where we're gonna have our line. And I've got it at 90 inches, which is the same distance from the porch to the other stake. So I'm just gonna stake this in and tie it up right at my 90 inches. The knot that I tied here is a taut line hitch, which is super helpful. Take your loose end, you cross it over the top, do one loop under, another loop under, then come back over the top of this one and back in. You can just pull that tight. And now you have a line that won't slip, but you can adjust it any way you need it, and it keeps tension and it doesn't move. So this is gonna be the highest part over here next to the sidewalk, and I want the stone to be about 2.5 inches above the surface, so 1.5 inches down. So that's where I put my stake. I use this measurement to put the line 2.5 inches from the sidewalk, so that starts my reference line. And then we'll run it and take measurements off of that as we go down. Now I can use my taut line and throw a little line bubble level on it to get level. The stakes are all in, my lines are level, and now I can take the measurement. So we were 2.5 inches high over the sidewalk, and now all the way back at this end, at the deepest point, we are right about 14 inches. So I've got 14 inches between this line and the ground, and that quickly goes to 12 inches and then 10 and 9 inches at the corner. So to figure out how many pavers I'll need, I'll just divide the thickness, which is 4 inches, into 14. And that gives me 3.5. Now that's nice because I will just round up and I will use 4 pavers. And my bottom paver will be halfway buried in the ground. So think about that when you're rounding up. You want to have that bottom layer buried at least half and maybe even more the higher your wall is going to be. So I'm going to mark out my 16 inches on this little stick here, but I'm also going to add 3 inches for my paver base. So I'm actually going to be digging out this trench 19 inches in the front. I'm also going to make marks at 4-inch increments from that 19 inches. So when I go from 4 stones to 3 stones to 2 stones, I can measure it that way. So I've got the trench on this short side dug, and then I did kind of an initial dig all the way down. But somewhere in between here and right about over here, I'm gonna go from 4 bricks to 3 to 2. So I'm not exactly sure how deep I need it in all of these areas. So what I want to do is start kind of building this out and then see how it works around this corner. And the corner is going to be a whole other thing that we have to talk about. All right, so today has been filled with some challenges already. I came out this morning and I was checking the level lines just to make sure that nothing had moved, and they were totally off. So I readjusted everything and then looked, and it was like 4 inches lower. So I scratched my head for about 15 minutes, and then I realized that the bubble level actually is not level. So a great way to check your bubble level is to level it out and then turn it 180 degrees. That bubble should remain exactly in the same place, and if it doesn't, then it's out. So I got a new one. We leveled everything out, and now everything came down a bit. So make sure you check your tools and equipment before you start doing all your digging. I've got it all leveled out now, and I had to backfill some of that dirt. Everything's tamped back down, and now I am at 15 inches over here for the 3 pavers and 11 inches where I go to the 2. And I do have the transition right here. But this is like the most important area, so as we go into it, I want to make sure that's going to all line up on the top. So I did a mock-up, and let me show you what it looks like. All right, so I made this little layout, and this would have been great when I was a kid playing Army in the backyard. Pew, 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 pew. But this is a perfect representation of what I want it to look like when it's in the trench. So because these stones are keystone, if you line them up edge to edge, then they make this curve. And I want to make sure that the top, it doesn't have huge gaps. So I set this up just to kind of get a feel for what I needed to do at the bottom row to make sure that the top row looked good. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in the ground because you want to make sure that your trench is right before you start putting in your paver base, because once that's in there, it'll be a huge pain in the butt to change things later. So running it down to the wall, I can see that I'm going to have a little less than half a brick at the end, which is fine. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be like a small little sliver that was going to be maybe 1 or 2 inches. Now, a lot of times people just start from the wall and work the way out, and that's probably the more traditional way, but I really wanted to make sure that I was going to nail that curve on the corner and hit that transition, so I started there. But you can really do it either way, because It's your wall. Do what you want. All right, the first layer is the paver base, and I'm just gonna layer this in about 2 inches deep, and then we'll tamp it down and get it really flat. All right, we got some paver sand here, and I transferred it into a bucket because it's just so much easier to pour in than in the bag. So I'm gonna put in a 1-inch base, and I'm gonna smooth that out and get it level. I'm gonna use a little concrete tool to help smooth it out and move it around. This is where you wanna start checking for level too, and get any high spots, screed it out. And use a smaller level to go front to back because you obviously can't pick that up with the bigger level. All right, now I'm gonna start over here in this corner. Once you get these bricks going, then you can level them off each other. But with these tumbled stones, it's a little difficult because they're not flat on top. I'm just gonna work my way around. So you'll see I have about a 1/2 inch gap in between these, and that's because it's the base row, and as you go up, you're gonna inset them. And as you inset them, that gap will close. So in the top layer, these will all be nice and flush, but they'll line up on the blocks below them. I need to cut this stone down on that first tile to fit up against the wall. So I'm just going to use a cold chisel and a sledgehammer to do that. I've also used tile saws, but these stones are 4 inches thick, which is too big for my 7-inch blade. So I'm gonna try it by hand and we'll see what happens. I'm just gonna strike a line down this, and I'm gonna do this all the way around because it'll help it split easier. All right, that actually split pretty well, especially for a bottom layer. On the top layer, may need to adjust it a little bit, but that was a pretty straight line split there. Like a glove. We've got the first row in, and just like before, I'm gonna start at the corner and then work my way back because I am using this keystone shape on the brick, and I wanna make sure that it's all gonna hit up properly when I get to the end. So for these, I'm gonna put them down and I'm going to center on the gap below it, but I'm also just gonna set these back a little bit. You want the wall moving in as it goes up. And I'm just gonna leave a little bit of a gap here in between them, so on that next layer, they can be tight together. Right as I come around this turn, this is where that bottom stone starts getting fully submerged into the ground. But once that stone goes under the ground, that's where I transition to just 2 layers versus 3 layers that we had over here. So now I've put some extra dirt in here, and I'm gonna build up the paver stone and the sand so that when I put the next rock in, it'll sit flush on top of the last paver in the first row. I don't think hitting this with a mallet really does anything. I think it's just all an illusion. And it's whispering, I hate you. All right guys, pit stop here because I'm gonna be honest. These things are kicking my butt. I don't understand how it can keep taking away so much sand and it keeps not being level. This is the most worthless footage ever. It's just me pounding on a rock for 20 minutes. Ooh, that was too low. These tumbled stones look amazing, but they are so hard to level. And it's just because there's the ups and downs. So if you're using especially a small level like this, on one side of the brick you might be up here and the other side you might be over here. So I'm really having a hard time with these. So a 4-foot level is really important, but man, the tumbled stones are tough. You can go with the flat variety. It's gonna be a lot easier. Let's keep going though. We can do it. All right, so I've got the whole second row laid out up into where it's gonna transition into the final layer over here. But coming around this corner is gonna be a little tricky. The problem is I'm working between 2 fixed points, the end of the house over here and the sidewalk here. And so I'm kind of at the mercy of that length and how the bricks end up angled at this last row. So I'll probably have to have a gap in the top here to make this curve. I'll show you what I mean on the top row. But either way, we can figure a way around it and might be able to cut some things and make it look a little nicer. We're almost ready for the top row, but before I get to that, the second row is still just sitting here, and I want to use some construction adhesive to block those together. And you want to make sure you get the one that is specifically for landscape. I'm going to put this down on top of the second row, get these all in place, and then we can move on to the final row. So I'm just going to take these up, and you want to make sure that the surfaces are free of dust, at least just give them a quick little dusting. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you just want to make sure that that adhesive is going to set right. When I put this down, I'm going to put it on the high spots because the bottoms of these stones are flat. So you want it on the high spots to make sure that the adhesive is going to stick. So I'm going to work my way through the rest and then we'll be ready for the next layer. Now we're ready for the top layer, and again, just like I did before, I wanted to start with the corner here. So you can do this or not. Honestly, I'm definitely over-engineering this because I am still a recovering engineer, and I try to get everything just perfect, but these are stones, and none of it's gonna be perfect. But this looks good to me, so I'll start removing these one at a time and then work my way back to the wall, and then we can go on the straight path, which should be the easiest part of the whole job. And when you're putting these down, you still want that about ½ inch overlap on the back so that everything leans in as it goes up. And these don't have a lip like some of the pavers do, so you're gonna have to do that by eye. And the nice thing, the adhesive doesn't set immediately, so you can still kind of wiggle these around once you put them in place. When you're setting these, you can kind of see where it wiggles and then put more of the adhesive so it'll be nice and firm attachment. All right, we're coming up to the last corner here, and it's not laid out exactly how I would want it. If I lay these in here the way that I want to, then I'm not gonna be able to start turning because this next brick, the angle is going the wrong way. So when I start this next brick here, it's just gonna shoot off straight. So what I'm gonna have to do is just take off the back end of this brick right here, and I can do that again just with the chisel, and then I should be able to make the turn, and we'll try to clean it up and make it look tumbled, but it shouldn't stand out that much. All right, I went ahead and got this thing cut, and didn't turn out exactly how I wanted. There's still quite a bit of gap here. That's okay. We've got more rocks. I tried again, and this one looks great. Now I can continue along with there, and this thing fits right in. This actually turned out a lot better than I thought it would. I've got the wall in, and with the adhesive, it is nice and solid, but there's some things we need to do on the backside to make sure that it's gonna hold up over time. And part of that's gonna be raising the soil in the bed and putting some support behind it. So I went ahead and I removed the liriope that we had there, as well as I trimmed up these yew bushes just so that we can be prepared for that. On this far side of the wall, we have a nice trench, so that's gonna be great, but around the front edge, we really don't have a spot to put that backfill of stone I'm gonna put in. So I'm gonna build that up first. I can start putting in some stone and making sure this wall's got some good support behind it and it's not gonna erode away. We're getting close to level on the bed, but I want the top layer of soil to be really good for the flowers, so I'm gonna be mixing in some garden soil with it. And right behind the wall, we're gonna add some stone that's gonna help give it some drainage as well as some support. So I cut some of this Vigoro fabric liner, and I'm just gonna put this down in here. The fabric liner is gonna keep the rocks from getting all clogged up with dirt, as well as it's gonna help that sand from eroding into it. And the stones I'm using are kind of a medium-sized rock, so they're gonna add a lot of support, but they're gonna let a ton of water go through so the water can come out the ends and go through the slope that I graded the bed with. I'm just gonna fill these rocks up to the top of this little trench here. Now to close this off, I'm just gonna fold it over, and then we'll cover that over with some dirt. Here along the front, where it's only 2 bricks, I wasn't able to get as much of a trench here that I would like, so it's gonna be a little bit harder to kind of get it contained. I'm gonna do my best to pour those rocks in and then kind of fold them over and then backfill it with dirt, and I think that'll just help push everything up against the wall. But honestly, since this wall is only 2 bricks high, the support's not gonna matter a whole lot. It's gonna be more about the drainage anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. All right, I've got the bed pretty well leveled out. I'm just gonna go over it with some fresh landscape fabric. Then I can transplant the liriope and put in some new Vigoro flowers and some Vigoro mulch on top, and we'll be ready for the reveal. This was a lot of hard work, but definitely doable for a beginner. I love how it turned out. We have some extra space here in the bed, and it really makes a statement in the front yard now. We're gonna be enjoying this all summer long. Now for each of these projects, I'm gonna give the breakdown of what it cost us for materials and tools, and also what it would have cost us to have a contractor do it and the savings for doing it ourselves. So for the retaining wall and the garden bed for tools and materials, we had $627 for materials, and the tools came in at about $95.84. And you can see some of the items that we had there. So that total estimated cost, $722.88. So I took a little average of what some contractors would charge, and it came up to $3,416.45. So by doing it ourselves, we would save $2,693.57. And it turned out great. Let's jump into the next project. Today we're going to be cleaning and staining a deck using the right tools to make it easy. So here's the deck that we're working with. It has a lot of wear on it, and it has a lot of stains, like this and that, and this and that. I started by removing all the loose debris with a broom. And I switched over to the shop vac to get the leaves and dirt that are wedged between the boards and against the house. And you'll want to remove anything that's touching the wood part of the deck. And if you have a covered deck like we do, go ahead and remove the downspouts if they're attached to the posts, because you don't want to get any stain on those. All right, now we're going to start cleaning the deck, and I'm going to be using two solutions here. The first one is just a general degreaser, but this one's going to help get off the grime and the stains and loosen that up. And then this one has oxalic acid in it, and that's going to help brighten up the wood. Now the first tool that's going to make this job easier is a pressure washer. But pressure washers have different tips, and the black tip is typically the low pressure tip. I put that one on the sprayer, and then I wet down the entire deck, including the railings and the posts. I'm using the machine's siphon tube to spread the cleaner. It mixes the water with the degreaser in a 10-to-1 ratio, so I just put the pickup tube in the jug and then let it dilute it for me. And the instructions say to leave it on for 10 minutes and then wash it off. So I sprayed the deck down, and while I was waiting, I hit the stains and the grease spots with a deck brush to help loosen them up. Now the stairs don't get much sun, and they had a ton of mildew on them, so I scrubbed them real good as well. And then I took the siphon tube out of the bottle and I put it into a bucket of some clean water, and then switched the black tip out to the green 25-degree high pressure tip to wash off the degreaser. This tip is a good mix between high pressure but not being too strong to damage the deck. So I went over the whole deck, spraying off the grime and the dirt with this tip. I did keep the nozzle pretty far away from the deck to make sure I wasn't damaging the wood, and I went through in sweeping patterns, removing all the cleaner. Now for cleaning a deck, you really don't need a gas-powered model like this. Most electric ones are going to have plenty of power to get the job done. I finished up removing all the degreaser, and then I could move on to the next step. Now that we've got the deck cleaned up really well, I'm going to go apply that second chemical, the oxalic acid. That's going to help brighten the wood and remove some of that extra stain and mildew that might have been left over, and it's going to help prepare for stain. It's an extra step, but I think it's really going to make the end product better. I switched back to the black tip, and I used the siphon tube to put the deck spray on so it could sit for 5 to 10 minutes. Now the oxalic acid works kind of like a bleach, and it brightens up the look of the gray weathered wood. And it works much better when the dirt and grime are already gone. So going with a degreaser first really lets the oxalic acid do its job more effectively. So after sitting for 5 to 10 minutes, I came back again and I washed it off just like before. All right, we've let the deck dry for 2 days, and now you can see it's nice and bright, but I do have some stains here. So what I'm going to do is hit them with a sander. Now, hand sanding off stains like this would take a long time, but an orbital sander takes them up in just a few seconds. After that, I went over the whole deck looking for nails sticking up, and I drove them flush or below the surface so that they wouldn't catch the stain pad. Now, before jumping into the staining, we taped up some plastic sheathing to protect the house because we are going to be doing some spraying soon. For the finish, I went with a semi-transparent stain and sealer in chocolate. Yummy. Now you typically want to go on the darker side when restaining so that you can help cover any of the old coloring that's left over. The posts are going to be easiest to stain just using a brush, so you don't have to worry about any overspray getting up on that ceiling. I went ahead and got the top of the rails while I was at it so I wouldn't have to spray straight down either. But for the rest of the railings, and especially the spindles, using a sprayer is one tool that will save you a ton of time and make this easy. I sprayed one rail section at a time, doing the top and bottom rails and the 3 sides of the spindles that I could get to from there. After spraying, I backbrushed the stain onto the wood to smooth it out and fix any drips or heavy spots. And after finishing up spraying all the vertical surfaces, I could then move on to the deck floor. All right, we have all the railings and the posts done, so now it's time for the deck. And for the deck, instead of spraying it, because we did tape it up to do that, I'm gonna use a lamb's wool applicator. I think this might go on better. But one thing to note, when you get these out of the package, there's gonna be a lot of little fur on there. So one of the things you can do is take some blue tape, wrap it around, and then pull it off. And now that'll get rid of most of the loose fibers, and that way they won't come off onto the finish.
I put the staining pad on the end of a pole and I filled a paint tray, spilled a paint tray with the stain. After cleaning up my little mess, I started on the far end of the deck using the lamb's wool pad. I really like this thing. It put down a ton of stain at one time and did a great job of getting into the cracks and crevices of the wood. I realized I probably should be cutting in the edges there, so I started doing that after the first few rows and working ahead of the staining pad. Now the nice part about using the pad on the pole is that it smooths the finish out just like brushing. So instead of spraying the floor and then having to go back and back brush any puddling, all I had to do was one stroke and it was all done in one step. As I worked my way across the deck, I got into a groove and I was doing 3 or 4 boards at a time. Now it's good to keep a wet edge and do the full length of a board all at the same time, and doing 3 or 4 at once seemed like the sweet spot to do it efficiently for me. Sometimes the stain pad did a good job of getting down between them, but if they were uneven or too tightly spaced, it didn't really work as well. In some spots even, I did have to go back with a brush and fill that in if the pad wasn't doing the trick. I worked my way off the deck and down the stairs, and then I could let that first coat dry.
It's been about an hour and a half. It says 1 to 2 hours to dry. You just want to make sure that it's not sticky before you put on that second coat. So for the second coat, we're just going to go over it, and the coverage is going to be a lot better on the second coat because it's already soaked down into the wood.
After drying for another few hours, the deck turned out amazing, and it went from nasty and bleached out to rich and ready for a steady summer of barbecues. And after it's cured for a few days, we'll be putting the refinished outdoor furniture back on it and enjoying it all season.
For refinishing the deck, the project cost breakdown on materials, we had $98.81, pretty inexpensive. On the tool side, $215.84. And that includes renting a power washer. I actually have my own, but if you're just going to be doing it for a day, I would suggest just renting one instead. So total estimated cost for us, $314.65. So the average contractor price will be $2,302.58, and that puts our total savings at $1,987.93 for this project. Today we're making old outdoor furniture look new again. All right, the first step in restoring furniture is to give it a good cleaning, and that starts with vacuuming it and giving it a good bristle brush to get all the debris off. The next step we're going to do is clean with soap and water. You just need a 1/4 cup of dishwashing detergent and a gallon of warm water. What I'm going to try to do is just clean these. I'm not even going to try to clean the patio cooler because it is far gone. I know I'm going to have to sand and refinish this. But these, I'm not sure how much of this is just dirt and how much we'll be able to get out with the soap. So let's find out. All right, with just a little bit of cleaning, you can see already all the grime that has come off. I cleaned this left leg over here, and honestly, it looks really good. I might be able to keep this just like this. This top one's got a little bit more wear, but you can see the difference between where I have cleaned and where I have not. So just the soap and water is going to take off a ton of dirt and grime, and if it's in good condition, you might be able to get away with just this, which is what we're trying to do. The least amount of work that we can with the wood still being protected.
And the next day, I started working on the side tables and the coffee table. And they were in such good condition that I could just lightly sand them with 220 grit to scuff up the surface and then apply a few top coats of varnish. I taped the concrete top so the varnish wouldn't get on it, and then I just brushed on some Total Boat Gleam 2.0 with a sponge brush. And I'm using satin here.
All right, got an early start today, and these turned out really awesome. These side tables look absolutely amazing, and then I'll show you on the coffee table what's going on because there is still a little bit of weathering that you see here. But we're okay with that, and it's also a good way to show you what's going to happen if you don't sand down all the way to the bare wood.
And to get the patio cooler down to bare wood, I took off all the hardware and then I removed the finish with 80 grit sandpaper on my random orbital sander.
All right, I got through all the sanding, and having a nice big sander really helps a lot. But eventually, you're going to get into some spots where the sander's just not going to get because of the circular nature of it. You can't get up into corners, and just it's hard to get into little spots. So I'm going to go ahead and hit these little spots in here with a hand sander, and then we'll talk about getting into all the little details in just a second. When you're completely stripping and refinishing the furniture, you really got to set your expectations because if you want it to look exactly like it did in the beginning, it's going to be a lot more effort. I'm not going to worry about that. I want this thing to be 90 to 95% of what it was new. So give yourself a little leeway there and think about what your expectations are before you go in so you don't have to spend a ton of extra time doing it to not really get that much return. I've got this whole thing sanded down now to 80 grit. I'm gonna go back and hit it with 150 grit. And as I was doing the 80 grit, I made sure to finish up with the strokes going with the grain. Also do the same thing when you're going to 150 grit, and then we'll go in and start doing a sealer.
And with the patio cooler done, I could move over to the raised planter.
All right, I just sanded the top on the planter, and one thing to note, don't think that you have to do the entire piece. This top was really bad because it gets all the water and the sun, but the sides look amazing. And so I'm just gonna do what I did on the tables on the bottom of this, and I'm gonna just refinish the top.
After sanding everything to 150 grit, I removed all the dust and started sealing the wood. I started off with Total Boat Wood Sealer and watched that cedar come to life.
All right, at this point, I have a sealer on that. I have at least the first coats on the other pieces. And so from now, it's just about building coats. So I'm gonna work my way around, and because I have so many pieces to work on, by the time I'm done with the first one and come back around to it, I might be able to do another coat. Between coats, you wanna sand with a high grit sandpaper, like a 320 grit, maybe a 400 grit, and just real light sanding. All you're trying to do is scuff up the surface and remove any dust nibs or any imperfections in there. And you'll know when it's ready to be sanded. You'll get a nice powdery white dust if you're using the spar urethane like I'm using. If it starts gumming up or it's hard to sand, that means it's not ready and it needs more time to cure. After that, just make sure you wipe everything down, get all that dust off, and then you can apply your next coat.
Now, while I was waiting for the finish to dry, I took the hardware for the patio cooler inside to spruce it up a bit. I started off with a rust remover soak to get rid of all the surface rust that I could. I dumped all the parts in there together and I let them sit for a few hours. I dried all of them off and then I laid them out and then I hit them with 3 coats of gloss black enamel spray. It's going to have a nice contrast with the cedar. And I reinstalled it and everything on the deck was looking amazing. Now with minimal work with the side table, sofa, and coffee table, they looked great again. And that patio cooler got a total makeover from its former nasty state. Now with the refinished deck, this place looks like $1 million and we're going to enjoy a lot of time out here this summer.
All right, for the cost breakdown on refinishing the furniture, we talk about materials and tools. Now for the materials, $68.71. For tools, I'm putting this at $0, and that's because I think that every DIY homeowner should at least have a cordless combo toolkit. That should include a drill, an impact driver, a circular saw, a reciprocating saw, and a sander. So some of these tool combos out there, you can get them as cheap as $248 through Walmart, the Hart brand. You know, not the most high quality brand ever, but it's gonna get the job done for a while until you can buy something else. You can also see some options for Rigid or Ryobi, which is a little bit step up. Or if you wanted to go out to a DeWalt or Milwaukee, you're gonna get closer to that $400 to $500 range. But an investment in those tools is gonna serve you for many, many projects throughout your house. And so I'm not gonna include any of the cost of those tools, only specialty tools here going forward. Now looking at what you would pay a contractor, this may be a little bit on the high side, but this is just some of what we got through doing a little bit of surveying, $4,582.46. And that would be doing a full refinishing of all these pieces of furniture, which would take a very long time. So a lot of that is gonna be just tied up in a bunch of labor costs. So as savings off of that would be $4,513.75. So definitely refinish your own furniture. Today I'm fixing this eyesore in our backyard, and I'm gonna be using reclaimed lumber so I can save some money.
And my neighbor tore down his old fence recently, and I was Johnny on the spot, and I took the sections right off his trash pile. I feel like I stole a bag of cash if I can salvage some of this wood.
So here's the project that we want to do. Underneath our deck, we just have a lot of junk, and frankly, it looks horrible. So what we want to do is enclose it. And I hate the look of lattice, so I want to do something different. I'm going to try to use those planks and get something that looks a little more modern and a little more sleek.
Now, the middle section looked pretty darn good, and I just needed to get the boards off without busting them up. I tried a pry bar at first, but it was just ripping the boards off and leaving the nails.
Right, so using the pry bar, it works, but man, it's taking a long time. Plus, I'll have to pry them out of this 2x4 if I want to reuse that later. So instead, I'm going to switch over to the recip saw, and I'm just going to whip down and cut all of the nails, have them fall off. Then I can punch the nail heads out later. I think it's going to be a lot faster.
Well, a lot faster was an understatement. This metal blade sliced right through the nails, and my one-handed recip saw was perfect for this job. I was mowing through these things with some speed and feeling a lot better about my salvage job at this point. I just went full Zen mode and I was sawing the ends off and then removing the pivots. I did run into some larger nails, those ones that secured the rails to the posts. Now any of these I just pull out with a hammer, or better yet, a cat's paw. Now this thing is a beast at pulling out nails, though I don't think it looks anything like a cat's paw. I think snake's tongue would be a way cooler and more appropriate name. Now, one thing that you'll quickly find is some of these 2x4 rails look like they took the fast boat to Banana Town. So I had a scrap pile going of all the unusable stuff and was just chunking things over there. And after going through this process a dozen times, I gotta say I got pretty darn good at it. I got it down to just about 8 minutes to disassemble an entire section, and it yielded 15 pickets in 3 2x4s.
So I got everything disassembled now. It took a few hours and I definitely got faster at the end, as you could see. But I have, I don't know, well over 100 of these planks here, and I have some of the 2x4s. And I'll decide tomorrow if I want to sand them first or wait till after I do the assembly. I'm going to start by boxing in this area here. So we're going to have some of these that are going to have actual gates and swing open, and some that will be fixed, and this will be a fixed one.
I took the measurements for the first opening, and then I went to the wood pile to see which 2x4s I could use. I had a few different lengths of boards here, so I picked ones that would get the most out of each piece for my cuts. I set up my small cordless miter saw in the backyard to make this job easier. But you've got to be real careful with these salvage boards. They've got the cut-off nails from the pickets in them, and most still had nails in the ends. Always check both sides before you cut, and remove any nails that won't let that board sit flat before you can do the cut. I used my hammer here, but that snake's tongue would have been way better. I cut all the 2x4s to length, and since they are simple rectangular frames, I used the first board to mark the next one to keep them the same size. I'm also keeping it simple here with the construction, and I'm going to be using pocket holes. Now look, these 2x4s are just straight nasty. I drilled the pocket holes on that mangled side that I cut the nails on, so that I could use that other flat face against the work table and at least have a fighting chance at these frames being straight. I secured everything together with Craig H&D screws, and I added in a center support on that large frame to attach the pickets later. Now with this first frame done, I went over and fit it in the opening, and I'll probably need to fine tune it a little bit since my 6x6 posts are twisted and out of plumb. Go figure. Now after that, I repeated the process and made one more large frame and 3 sets of smaller frames that'll be for swinging doors to access under the deck at different spots. And with all the frames done, I started laying out the pickets to see how many I'd need to cover each one. Now unfortunately, these boards were too short to cover all the way across the large frame, so I'll have to cut the pickets to half the size and do 2 runs of them. And because I'm a sucker for symmetry and a recovering engineer, I marked the cuts so that the nail holes would fall in the middle of that final piece. Now it would have been nice to avoid the nail holes altogether, but I just couldn't make it work with the length of these boards. And it'll just be part of the charm of a reclaimed wood project. And so I had 2 large frames and 7 small ones that I had to clad, and that meant a ton of pickets that I needed to use. So I went through the pile and I was cutting down parts for all the frames to different sizes to match each one. And after I had a few good stacks, I wanted to try out my new toy that I picked up. Now punching out the nails by hand would have been as fun as shopping for straight 2x4s, and it would also take forever. So I picked up this pneumatic air locker to punch them out. It has this little rod that fires out of the end and punches the nail when you pull the trigger. It's basically like a scaled down version of that dude's weapon from No Country for Old Men.
Call it. For a whole lot. Just call it.
So instead of air locker, I'm calling it the Death Puncher. Now the Death Puncher worked like a charm, and I was firing those nails out of there left and right. And after all that, this was the right time to sand the boards. This was a huge undertaking, so just sit back and relax while I do all the work. Now next up I ripped the 5 1/4 slats down into 2-inch and 3-inch strips. It'll add some dimension and character to the slats versus all being the same size. And I'll get the most yield out of the boards this way too. But this project quickly started eating up my shop, as 100 plus slats just became 200 plus slightly smaller slats. And now I could finally start putting these frames together and see how they look. I started off with 2 of the small panels. I set the strips flush on one side, which is where the doors will meet when they're closed. And then that left an overhang on the outside that I could trim to fit. Now for the spacing in between the boards, I used scraps which are just about a 1/2 inch thick. Now this looks pretty good. It's going to give plenty of airflow to keep any mold from happening under the deck. Now the final strip was a bit too wide, so I cut that down on the table saw before attaching it. I'm using my 15 gauge trim nailer with galvanized nails to attach all these strips. I think I bought this thing like 20 years ago. It's a little tank. This thing's totally made out of metal. They just don't make them like this anymore. Seriously, the company shut down, I think. The process took a while, but it was so satisfying seeing the frames coming together. Now, installation of these bad boys was a bit tricky. The posts were all kinds of jacked up with twists and bends like I mentioned. Now track saw works wonders here, as you can just put it right on the layout line and quickly get your cut. But I was being pretty cautious to not cut more than I should, so after a test fit, I did have to do some fine tuning to get it just right. Now for the larger stationary panels, I cut down 2x2s for mounting cleats. I mounted them to the deck posts so that the finished surface of the panels would be set back 1.5 inches, and this is going to allow for the hinges that I'm going to use on the other doors. Then I could secure the frames to the 2x2 cleats with 2.5-inch screws in the gaps between the slats. And man, this sucker was looking good. I am so glad that I saved this wood from the dump, as the hard work was really starting to pay off. Now the other full frame went in nicely on the other side, and nicely means after a few adjustments. Then I could move on to the swinging doors in the middle. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to make these hinges line up on these warp beams, but then I had a stroke of genius, or at least like a dot of inspiration. I cut another piece of 2x2 that was the same height as the doors, and then I mounted the hinges flush with the top and the bottom, and I used the holes that would go into the panels when it's fully assembled. So now I could take them back to the post and line them up with the layout marks that I just made. Now, after attaching the top hinge, I just needed to position the bottom hinge so that the 2x2 was straight up and down. And this actually worked out really well. I used the same system throughout the rest of the install. And to make sure the doors were perfectly aligned, I clamped the two sections together before installing them. And then Susan and I brought them over as one piece, and we could shim them into place to get everything level. Now this again worked surprisingly well, and sometimes overthinking things does come in handy, I guess. After I got the hinges all secured to the doors, I gave them a little test run. Maybe I'll start doing musicals under here. I finished off the side of the deck with the same technique. Now with all the doors installed, I needed to deal with that tricky little bit under the stairs. I had extra 2x2s left over from the cleat material, and so I went ahead and used those. After getting a few measurements, I cut the vertical and horizontal parts to fit, and then I put pocket holes on the ends to hold them together. And I marked the slope on those horizontal boards, and it was a lot easier than using my protractor, much to its disappointment. I used the bar of my clamp to offset the line 1 inch inward, and then I made a mark for the cut. Then I could cut the long section of the triangle to size, and just attach it with a few screws to complete the frame. I installed the slats on this piece the same way as I did before, but this time I used a large carpenter square to set the slats straight. The overhanging ends here are going to be cut flush with the track saw later.
So unfortunately, I do not have the parts to finish the rest of that triangle, and we are losing light really fast. And I have to get a coat of finish on this right now because it's going to rain a couple days so I can catch up to it. So I'm going to come back to that and just go ahead and start staining right now.
We prepped the doors by masking off the hinges with some painter's tape. We also put down some plastic sheeting to protect the grass and the rocks. I'm spraying the finish here because brushing it on would be a complete disaster and take forever. And now the fun part, the spraying. Now seeing this stain go on really tied everything together, and it went on really fast. Now I'll have a link in the description to the Flexio 5000, and I would highly recommend a sprayer like this for a project of this size. Before hitting the second coat, I finished up the triangular piece and I installed it there under the stairs. Now the setback was perfect, so I could just attach it right to the stringer for the stairs and the vertical post. I also decided to put a stop on the front of the swinging doors so that the look was consistent across all the panels. After I got those in place, I could stain those two parts and then move on and do a second coat for everything else. That second coat really darkened things up nicely.
The color match turned out great, and just this whole area looks amazing. I am so happy with what we've done. Was it a lot of work? Absolutely, but it was worth it.
This has also got a lot of extra storage, and it is a really nice addition to the deck.
So So cost recap on the underdeck storage, we had $436.42, and that's actually what it would cost if you had to buy the material. So I did not, so I would subtract out about 310 bucks off of that. So for me, it was much cheaper, but I want to let you know how much it would probably cost if you bought that material. Now for tools, $242.83, and that is really just gonna be a nailer and a sprayer, since we're already accounting for all those tools I mentioned before that we already have those. So the total cost, $679.25. Now if we compare that to what a contractor might charge us here, $1,696.66, which honestly I think is fairly low. So maybe we offset that with the refinishing furniture, which I think was a bit high, but that comes in with a savings of $1,017.41. Today we're using some paver edging to transform the backyard from this to this.
I just finished enclosing the area under my deck and it looks great. But the landscaping, well, what landscaping? Now we're going to class this joint up a little bit here and add a garden bed with paver edging along with some raised planters and a walkway. I drove a stake down near the stairs and I ran the line down the front edge of the garden bed, which ended up being right around 65 inches from the deck. And my house juts out a couple feet past the deck on the side, and this made a great visual stop for the bed. So I ran another line from the corner of the house up to meet that first one at a right angle. Now I was trying to get this perfectly lined up because, you know, engineer and all, but you just need to get it close because then I sprayed the line with spray paint, which isn't exactly a model of precision. To get a nice rounded corner, I measured in from both sides of the string about 15 inches at the corner. Now I could get a nice pivot point, and then I used my tape measure as a guide for the spray can. You might be able to just do this by eye, but I kind of draw and spray paint like a 5-year-old. So I do need the guidance to keep it presentable. So I followed the line down the front of the deck to the other stake to round off the bed on that end. I used the same trick here to make the corner, but I made sure to put the raised planter in place so I could see how the spacing would look there in between the edge and the planter. And now I could commit to the layout and dig out the edge with a spade shovel. But instead of pulling up the dirt at this point, I was just getting a good crisp line, plus or minus 0.5 of a degree.
All right, I established the edge with my straight shovel. Now I'm gonna go back and use the digging shovel, and I've got to remove at least 2 inches off this entire area. So I'm gonna take the top layer of the grass off and throw it on here on the tarp. If you're ever digging in your yard, make sure you're throwing the dirt on a tarp because getting it out of the grass later will be a huge mess. After we do that, then we can start grading it and put a string line in here and really start leveling it out and getting it right where we need it.
And this is the first of many times that you're gonna see me digging in this video. And it's gonna look about 1,000 times easier than it really was.
So these are the bricks I'm going to be using, 7 inches long by 3.5 inches wide, and they are 1 3/4 inch thick. But underneath each of these, I need 2 inches of paver stone and 1 inch of sand to get a nice base. So altogether, that's right around 5 inches. So I'm going to dig a 5-inch trench all the way around the edge and make sure that they have a good base.
I used the aptly named trenching shovel to dig out the small trench. It's a lot easier to use the full width of a shovel versus digging in from the sides with a wider one. And to help me quickly gauge the depth of the trench, I made a 5-inch mark on a scrap of wood. I also put a 2-inch mark on there for the next section that I'll be digging. I'm setting the pavers flush with the ground so it'll be easy to roll bikes and lawnmowers across it. I used the stick up against the sidewall to see where it hit on that top edge of the dirt to gauge where I was at. And I just got to digging. I ran into a drain pipe here and I just cut it off before the trench. Now, I hope I made the right decision, but I guess we'll figure that out later.
All right, we've got the 5-inch trench, and now I'm gonna level this part. And what I wanna do is have it 2 inches deep, but also I need to slope it from the bottom here so these doors were still open all the way to this front edge. I'll run some string line in between here and there, and then I can use my little stick at the 2-inch mark to make sure that this is all dug down so we have enough space to build it back up with the stone.
Now, after laying out the string, I could see that I had a lot more to remove on the front edge, and it was like that pretty much the whole length of the bed. And at this point, I also realized I was just causing myself more work by putting the dirt on the tarp first. And I'm a big proponent of work smarter, not harder, so I started going directly into my little rolling dump cart here, which, by the way, this thing is amazing. It's way more stable and maneuverable than a wheelbarrow. I'd give this thing 2 shuffle-blistered thumbs up. And since this was coming up on 2 days of the tarp being in the grass, I decided I'd better move it so that I didn't have a great-looking garden bed with a huge patch of dead grass in front of it. But after working my way around the bed, I had a pretty decent base layer to work with.
So just when you thought the digging was done, actually we've got some more to do. I'm gonna be putting in a couple of these pavers. So I'm gonna do 2 rows of 3 of these, and that's gonna lead right into the underdeck storage. So I'm gonna mark that out with some spray paint and then dig that down to 5 inches. And then we will be ready to put the stone dust in. And I gotta say I'm ready for that because I'm tired. We'll keep going.
I'm beginning to feel a little bit like Andy Dufresne's digging my tunnel for years, but we're getting closer to freedom. Now, after raking and tamping down the soil to get a fairly level base, I put down some weed control fabric. Now, this will be really important where I just have the rocks, so I'm not going to be picking weeds out of there all the time.
Get everything cleared out and the fabric liner is down to stop the weeds. Now I can start putting in the base, which I'm going to put in the rock base for the pavers, and I'll put that along the trench and all in this area right here where the pavers are going to go.
Now, all the rock, sand, and stones that I'll be using are bagged from the home center. You can definitely get it cheaper though if you buy it in bulk from a landscaping company. It's just a trade-off of ease of use and getting the right amount of material, since buying a few more bags of stone is a lot easier than going out to get another yard of gravel. After pouring in the base, I tamped it down with a 4x4 post since my large tamper won't fit in the narrow trench. As I was filling the trench, I spread the bags into the walkway area here as well. And remember that work smarter, not harder? Well, that's me walking back and forth around the dump cart a half dozen times. Just getting in my workout. And I also added a 3-inch line on my wood scrap, and I was aiming at that level, which would give me an inch of sand and then the pavers on top to be level with the ground. The big tamper made short work of compacting the stone in the walkway. And this part is important too, as it gives a solid foundation to the pavers so they won't heave or settle over time. Adding the stone and tamping it down in layers helps it get nice and tight so you're not trying to compact 2 or 3 inches of stone all at once by hand. I worked my way around the side of the deck and I filled in the trench and the small stepstone recesses. And now I could get to the fun part, laying the pavers in place. Now the ground was pretty uneven around the tree there, so I set up another string line to help give me a visual reference for setting the stones. I transferred a bag of sand into a 5-gallon bucket to make it easier to manage and pour out. And then I could put in a bed of sand that was deep enough to bring the bricks up to the string line. Now this is my first time laying pavers like this, and I didn't screed out or level the sand perfectly here. I opted to just kind of lay the bricks in and then pound them flush with a mallet. I also started in the middle, and then I worked my way back towards the deck so that I could use the middle pavers to level the back ones, because I couldn't hit that string line all the way to the back because of that concrete footer on the deck. And after laying that straight line of bricks, I had to start making some adjustments.
So I'm getting to the corner now and I've got a couple options here. So I could just go ahead and curve that and leave a little gap in between the edges of the bricks, but I do have a wet tile saw, so I'm gonna go ahead and use it. Now you don't have to, you could leave it open, but I'm just gonna basically stack these down here, see where they overlap, draw a pencil line, and then cut them to fit. Hopefully I can get it right, but it'll definitely look better than a larger gap.
To mark the cuts, I laid a brick on top of the last one installed, making sure that the back corners were lined up. Then I angled it to fit the curve, and I marked a line where it overlapped the brick beneath it. Now using that line, I can make a quick cut on the wet tile saw, which this thing cuts through these stones like butter. And the next stones are a little trickier because you need to make a cut on both sides. I used the same method, lining up the back corners, and then I marked a cut line. But I'm cutting the bricks on both sides this time. So whatever that overlap was between them, I would cut half off of each brick, because if I cut the full overlap off each one, then there'd be a big gap left in between. I repeated the process and worked my way around the curve, making the cuts and then setting the stones in place. Now, leveling them on a downward slope around a curve was a bit tricky, but I just made sure it stayed fairly flat, and I was gauging it with my 2x4 and trying to transition from that string line on the side to the one in the front. But once I hit the front edge, things went really fast. I would lay down a bed of sand and smooth it out with my trowel or the 2x4 and then set the pavers in place. Then I just smack them like whack-a-mole until they submitted and were level on my line. When I got to the other corner, I put the side string line back up so that I could transition around the curve to the side of the house. Now the last brick in that run needed to be cut, so I figured I'd try splitting it with a cold chisel just to show you an alternative way to cut the pavers. I scored a line across it and then kept hitting it with my chisel along that line until it snapped. Let's just say, this method is not as precise or as clean as the tile saw. I'd probably recommend using a circular saw with a masonry blade over this method, especially for angled cuts.
All the pavers are installed now, and they are in that bed of sand, and you saw I was compressing them down there, so they're pretty solidly in there, but they could move side to side. So I'm going to use some polymeric sand, and that goes in between the joints. It's kind of like a mastic that'll harden after I put some water on it. It's going to help to hold those together and resist them from moving around.
Now honestly, this is probably the worst use for polymeric sand since the connections between the stones are very minimal. And it's not going to be nearly as effective as it would be if they were touching along the long edge. I used a little chip brush to help move the sand into the gaps, and I tapped the bricks with my shovel to help the sand settle all the way down. And to try to give it just a little more oomph and sticking power, I did build up a little beveled layer on the inside of the bricks, and I also filled in the gap between the dirt wall and the stones there. Now, I honestly don't know if this is going to help at all, but I figured it was worth a shot and it was better than nothing. Now, to activate the polymeric sand and get it to harden, you have to wet it down. Basically, you're just trying to get it fully wet without washing it out of the joints. Now, before moving on, I added a little bit more weed barrier to the back of that main bed to cover the spots that I missed before because I ran out of fabric.
Where are my clouds at? Now I can start laying in the large 16 by 16 pavers. I'm going to do 6 of them right here in the center to give me some easy access in and out of the storage area for things like my lawnmower and things that have wheels on it. So I'm going to lay down the sand bed and then start laying those in.
I dumped a few bags in and I leveled it out with the back of a hard rake to get it spread out before leveling it off. Now, I was feeling pretty confident about my ability to just screed this out level by eye, so I did. I mean, how hard could it be to get it close to level, right? And after meticulously eyeballing it, I laid down the 2x4 along the center line to act as my guide for the pavers. I put a stone on either side and then I threw a level on them. And apparently my pupil level is not as good as the real deal. And after a few attempts at adjusting the pavers, it was clear this was not the way.
All right, that didn't work very well. I thought I could just screed it and kind of do it by eye, but moving that 16 by 16 paver, it's not like these little bricks where you can just pound them and they move. The 16 by 16 is a lot harder to actually push down into the sand because of all the surface area. So I'm gonna do it what I should have done in the beginning. I thought I could get away with it. I'm gonna put some pipe in the sand and screed off of that and get a nice level surface so then I can just put them down and have minimal back and forth and having to adjust them. Do it right. Do it light, do it wrong, do it long.
I sunk the conduit pipes into the sand and then I leveled them off one another so that they both had the same slope from front to back. And then I added in more sand and I used the 2x4 to screed it flat across the whole surface. And I added in sand whenever there was low spots. Now this is the way. I wonder if the Mandalorian ever uses his Beskar spear for screeding, but that worked pretty well. The second go-round worked way better, and screeding the sand made this part easy as I could just lay down the pavers and make some very minor adjustments to get them level with each other. Now next I brought over the raised planters that we're using. We opted for metal versus wood just for some longevity. I cut out the liner in the center of the planter so that the veggies that we're putting in can have access to the soil beneath. And then I dug out some soil on the backside to make the planter a little bit more level. And now it was finally time to add in the rocks. And I'm using a river rock, or technically a river pebble here for these. It matches the style that's under the deck already, and these are a bit smaller, so they're going to fit nicely in between the stones. After the rocks were all in, we filled up the planters with a combo of garden soil, compost, and perlite. And we're trying our hands at vegetable gardening for the first time, so if you have any tips, leave them in the comments down below. And the garden bed turned out great, and the paver edging really defines the space and holds the rocks there in place nicely. And the deck skirting looks even better with this nice walkway up to it, and this is a huge upgrade from where we started just a few weeks ago.
And for a recap of the Paver garden bed, $523.35 in materials, and on the tool side, $125.84, which is just going to be some of the little common smaller tools that I was using. So that total estimated cost would be $649.19. Now if we compare that to what a contractor might charge, on average maybe $1,564.89. And if we do that savings, that's going to bring it in at $915.70. Today, I'm going to show you how to take an old worn out playset and restore it just like brand new.
When we moved into our house, the playset in the backyard wasn't in the best shape. And after 5 more years without any maintenance, it was really showing its age. So it was time to do something about it. I started off by taking care of a part that's been annoying me for a while. Now the kids never climb on this little rope wall, plus it was rotting and really worn, so I just lopped it off with my recip saw and hoped the kids didn't notice. Of course they did. After that, I started taking off all the different accessories on the playset to prep for cleaning. I also removed some rotted boards on the bottom of the climbing wall that I'll replace with new cedar boards later. Now most everything else was just screwed in, so I removed the handles, the screen, and the windows easily. And that slide made for easy egress while I was at it. There was this tic-tac-toe game inset in the side wall that was all busted up, so I wanted to take that off as well. But I wasn't ready for this. Apparently, my kids weren't the only ones enjoying the playset. Now, after dealing with those ants, my younger son jumped in to help, and we removed the slide and all the swings from the playset and put them aside. And it's been a while since they were small enough for that baby swing, so that's gotta go. Teardrop. The hardware holding the swings was all rusted up, so I wanted to refurbish them as well. They were held on by long through bolts, and I backed them off and was ready to start cleaning the playset. To make cleaning the playset a lot faster, I'm using a pressure washer. And I mixed up some multi-purpose cleaner concentrate to help cut through the mildew and grime. Now, of course, whenever you're using a pressure washer, you want to make sure you're wearing the right safety equipment. Goggles are great to help protect your eyes from overspray. I started off at the top of the playset and hosed everything down with a good dousing of the cleaner, and then let it sit for 5 minutes to do its thing. While I was waiting, I cleaned out the siphon tube with some clear water and then switched the quick connect tip out to the 40-degree white tip, which is the least aggressive of the bunch. I wanted to test it out on these rotten boards that I'd removed from the climbing wall. I turned up the pressure until it did a pretty good job of removing all the gunk without stripping the wood. And then the fun began. I started off with the roof, and I was watching the grime and the mildew get blasted away. After cleaning the bench though, I noticed that some mildew was still hanging on the lower boards. So I switched over to the 25-degree green tip to get a little more aggressive spray pattern. Now this did the trick perfectly, and the mildew came right off on the second pass. And there's a fine line between removing grime and destroying the fragile wood fibers of a soft wood like cedar or redwood. Make sure you keep the water fan moving at a constant pace. If you slow down or stop in one spot, it can easily gouge the wood. Now the outer swing set posts were just absolutely disgusting. I gave them the business though, and I was amazed at how quickly the pressure washer cut through this funk. Now, pressure washing the wood does leave it a little bit rough, so I went back and sanded the edges with a 150 grit sand block to keep everything nice and smooth. The climbing handholds and the other plastic accessories were really faded from years of being in the sun. I found some matching spray paint and I gave all the parts 3 coats of paint and then topped it off with 3 coats of gloss clear coat for protection. For the metal handles, I used some acetone to clean off any dirt and oils, and the larger handles had a few rust spots, and one end was totally rusted out. I sanded all the loose rust away, then I gave all the handles a coat of rust-stopping, self-etching primer. Then I followed up with the same treatment as the plastic parts, with 3 coats of paint, followed by 3 coats of gloss clear coat. I hope this is going to hold up well and provide many years of protection. While I was spraying everything, I moved over to the swing hardware. I sanded all the rusted parts to knock off the loose rust and then primed these also with the self-etching primer. I top coated these with some aluminum colored spray paint and they looked brand new when I was done. I started trying to refurbish the old swings and bring them back to life with the spray paint, but as I was spraying them, I quickly realized it was not going to look great since the plastic was all cracked and the chains had a coating that was kind of falling off. So I threw in the towel and I just went ahead and ordered 2 new swings. Now the last thing I needed to prep before applying the finish was to cut the replacement boards. I used some inexpensive cedar fence pickets from the home center and cut them to size. Then I sanded them smooth and rounded over the edges with my router. Now it was finally time to put on the new stain and see this playset transform. I started at the top and I sprayed on a semi-transparent stain and sealer combo. I sprayed on a light to medium coat, then I backbrushed it with a chip brush to even out any puddling or drips. Now, this approach worked really well, and spraying the finish on went quickly with this sprayer. The sprayer I'm using here is the Finish Max HVOP from HomeRite. It's an inexpensive electric sprayer and it runs off an extension cord. The material cup isn't huge, so you do have to refill it often, but that keeps it light and it's perfect for jobs like this when you need to put down the finish fast. I'll have a link down below in the description, you can check that out as well. Now you can see even from the first coat what a difference the stain made to the play gym. The wood was really dry and thirsty, so the first coat soaked in fast. One thing to look out for is when you spray on top of hardware like the bolt heads. If you don't wipe it off quickly, it's going to dry on there and it's going to look bad. So I carried a shop towel in my pocket and I wiped the heads off after I sprayed a section. I applied 2 coats in all, and after a day of drying, I started reassembling everything. When you disassemble, I'd recommend using some Ziploc bags and labeling the fasteners. It would have made this part go a lot faster, because I just had a jumble of screws and fasteners I had to sort through as I was mounting everything. But everything slid into place. While I was waiting for the new swings to arrive, I did some reading and found recommendations for swing set widths and distances from each other and from the structure. So I drilled some new holes to move the brackets and decided to only use 2 swings here versus 3. And you may want to wear a dust mask while drilling overhead. I reinstalled the hardware, but I only put 4 of them back up to hold the 2 swings, so they'd have plenty more room to swing between them. The sun set on me that day, but the next day I finished up the final pieces. I reinstalled all the climbing wall handholds, and man did they look great against that fresh stain. For the repair pieces at the bottom, I drilled out 2 new holes in each one of the boards for the handholds. Then I hammered in the threaded inserts into the back and attached the boards to the climbing wall with deck screws. I finished it off by securing the handholds with new bolts and washers. The swings arrived and I hung them up on the set. The chain was a bit too long, so I adjusted them up, and I'll come back and cut the excess chain off when I can borrow some bolt cutters. I put the finishing touches on the playset and it was all wrapped up. After looking at the before pictures and the videos, I'm really just amazed at how drastic of a difference this is. The playset really does look brand new from a distance, and close up there's still some chips and bruises, but the stain, the paint job, and the new swings have given this playset a new lease on life.
All right, for refinishing our playset, on the material side for us, $126.62, and then tools, $195.87, again with a tool rental on that pressure washer. So a total estimated cost of $322.49. And if we hired a contractor, the average could be about $1,131.81, and that gives a total savings of $809.32. Today we are building a fire pit, and I've got a lot of stuff to unload from the truck because I bought a lot of different options so I can show you some of the different varieties that are out there between leveling options, different pavers, and even fire inserts. We're going to cover that all today. I'm Brad from Fix This Build That. Let's build something awesome. And we're here in my backyard, and I've done a lot of projects to make it look nice back here on the deck, but we still are using a nasty old fire pit. So making a nice permanent stone fire pit is going to be a great addition back here. There's a lot of different things to consider. I'm going to be walking through all those with you, and the first thing we're going to start with is stone selection. Now for stones, you have a few options that you can get at the home center. I went to Home Depot to pick up mine, and I got this 12-inch retaining wall brick. So if you're making a circular fire pit, you're probably gonna be looking for one that has this wedge shape to it. Now this one is nice because it does have the flat sides on it, but it does have this little lip on here, which is used for setting back retaining walls. So you might have to knock that off or it's not gonna sit proper. At today's prices, these are coming in at $218 a brick. So if you had a 3-tiered fire pit with 12 stones on each, you're gonna come up to right under $80. Now, like I said, these are wedge-shaped bricks, and so if you put them edge to edge, they're gonna naturally make a circle. And so when I put these together, the retaining wall bricks, it takes 10 of them to make a circle if you put them edge to edge with no gaps. And that's the look that we're going for. So if you do that here with 10 bricks, the opening becomes right around 25 inches. Now that is quite a bit smaller than what we want. We want about a 3-foot fire pit or maybe 30 inches. So to get that, what we would have to do is back these up and open the gaps. So as we do that, we would make room for the other 2 bricks that we would need to make that size. So adding in these cicadas are getting excited about this fire pit. Now adding in these 2 extra stones, that gets me to the measurement that I want, which is right around 33 inches. But the problem is when you add the stones in and widen them, now you have these gaps here, and that's gonna translate as we make the layers up. I don't wanna do a top cap for these, and so that means that we would have gaps on the top. And personally, I just don't like that look. And if you're okay with it, then that's fine.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
Next up, we have what they call a wall stone, and this is a tumbled brick look. So it does have the flat edge on one side, and it is tumbled and kind of just organic on the rest of it. Now, I like the looks of this one a lot better, but the downsides of this one is with this rough top, it's a little bit harder to level, and I found that out when I was doing the retaining wall in the front yard. I struggled mightily. Man, the end of this row is really kicking my butt. But they really look nice, and if they're on a firm foundation, you can make them work. Now these come in at $2.48, so if you go with 36 of those, it'll be right around $90. Now we're gonna be going with this one because I like the way that it stacks and the size of the circle it gives you when everything is edge to edge. Let me show you what I mean. So you can really see the differences side by side here. All together with the 12 stones, this one is about 33 inches, whereas 10 stones and no gaps, this one is closer to 25. And I really like the look of the tight together stones, so we're definitely gonna go with this one. One other option you do have to expanding a ring is using some spacer bricks. But what you can do is use these spacer blocks, and then as you move them out, you can put this spacer in between, and then now that's going to increase the overall diameter of your ring. And also it's a nice little design feature, but you'll have to find the stones that are the exact same height as your other blocks. All right, the next thing you need to think about is fire rings. And I've got a few of them right here, and I'm going to talk about the different options of why you might use one versus the other. You don't have to use a fire ring insert, but it's gonna make your bricks hold up longer and can also add to the look and the feel of your fire pit. Now the first one here, this is a galvanized fire pit, and this one I am not gonna recommend. These are about $90 locally. Now the big downfall of these is one, it does not have a flange around the top, so it's not gonna sit over your bricks and kind of hold everything together. And it is the tallest at about 12 inches, but you can kind of see it is very misshapen. So we're about 32 inches this way and 34 inches that way. Now these other 2 fire rings, these are your more traditional. They have a flange on top and they have some type of black powder coating to keep them from rusting. Now, this one is a solid surface, so it looks really good. Bro, making a video here. So I got this one locally. This one was, I think, $110. And honestly, I like the look of this one the best because it does have that one-piece flange on top. And actually, they sell this in a kit at Lowe's for $248. You can get enough for 3 layers of the stones and this. If you do the math, they're ripping you off because you can buy this for $110 and all the stones, like I mentioned earlier, for $90, so you can get the whole thing for $200. The problem is that it is pretty shallow. We're only about 6 inches here, and so this is not really deep, and you'd have to build up the gravel underneath to continue to protect the bricks. Now, on the other hand, I got this one. This one was off of Amazon, and this comes in a 4-piece kit. I assembled this together with bolts. You do have this break here where they come together, so that is gonna be a little bit of a lip, and obviously it's just not as visually appealing as a solid ring. But this one is 10 inches tall, and that's gonna work really well in our 3-layer fire pit. Now looking at how these fit, the galvanized one is way too big, doesn't even fit down inside there. Now the small ring fits perfectly in there, and like I mentioned, they sell this in the kit, so that's not surprising. But the one that we're gonna be going with is the segmented one with the nice flanged lip on it, and that one fits down nicely. There's a nice size gap here in between the brick and the insert, and that will be great if you're gonna be doing a smokeless fire pit. Now that we've got our materials picked out, the next thing to consider is the location of your fire pit. And the main consideration you want to have is in between any structures, your deck or a house or a fence. And for us locally here, we need to be 15 feet off. Typically it's 10 to 20 feet depending upon your location. Now for us, 15 feet lands right here, which is clearly in front of the fire pit. And we're actually gonna be going back just a little bit this way, so we should be fine. But not only where the fire pit is, but think about where the seating is gonna be. So you're gonna wanna look at 5 feet or so, 6 feet away from the fire pit. Make sure that the center of the fire pit is about 6 feet away from any slope. And that's gonna make it a lot better to sit around the fire and enjoy it and not tumble down the hill. Now we can start placing and digging the fire pit. So this is gonna be right about here. And you can mark the center and then do an outline with spray paint, but I find an easier way to do that is to just lay the bricks down around the fire pit. So we'll go ahead and move these over. Now we can use the stone ring to define the edge, and I'm going to use a flat shovel to do that and just go around and mark it. Now, what we want to do is add a little bit of gravel on the outside of our ring. If you didn't want to do that, you can just go straight up against these stones. But what we're going to do is we're going to add about a little 3-inch gravel line around the side. So I'm going to use these little pavers around here and just stack a few of them up and then just cut a line all the way around, and I'll move the stones around as I go. All right, fast forward, this is day 2, and that's because some rain came in right after we got through outlining this. But don't worry, you should easily be able to get this done in one day, as long as it doesn't rain. Now I'm gonna go ahead and remove these stones and then dig out 2 to 3 inches here and a deeper hole in the middle, which we're gonna use for drainage, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. Now before you start digging, you wanna make sure you know what is under the area where you're gonna dig, and the way to do that is by calling 811. So you can call 811, or you can go to your state's 811 website. They will come out and will mark on your property where all the lines are at. For us, they were all on the side, so we are completely free to dig back here. So digging this pit down is not only going to allow some drainage, but it will also level everything out. So if your yard slopes, you don't want to just build your fire pit on top of it and have those stones tumble over and not be really sturdy. The other thing is for drainage. Having 2 to 3 inches of paver base, which is what I'm going to put in here, is going to allow some drainage. But we've also got some clay soil in here that doesn't really drain well. And so if you have something similar, what you can do is dig a hole in the middle, and I'm going to do about a 12-inch hole that's maybe 8 to 10 inches deep, and then backfill that with gravel. And it's going to give the water more time to drain out and soak into the soil before it floods out and you have just a fire pit filled with water. All right, so I was digging the hole and I ended up running into a bunch of gravel. So I'm not sure what they put back here when they were building the house, but what I'm gonna do is just pour a bucket of water in here and we'll see how well it drains. And if it drains well, I'm just gonna stop digging right now because it looks like there's already a lot of rock down there. I guess it would help if I had an actual measure to know how fast it should be draining or not. The water is going down a bit, but it's just soaking into the dirt, so it doesn't look like it's draining as fast as I thought it might. So I'm just gonna go ahead and keep digging. Apparently in a big pit of water now. There's that clay. All right under that gravel, we had about 6 inches of hard packed clay, and that's why it wasn't draining. So this is really gonna help out. And I'm just gonna put in some stones here. So these are just river stones, which are really decorative, but you can definitely use gravel in here if you can get it for cheaper. This is about the cheapest thing that I could find at the home center. So I'm just gonna fill up the hole up to the top. I was able to get a whole bag of rocks into that pit. So I'm just gonna tamp everything down, and then we can move on to the paver stones. The next stage of the drainage and for the leveling, I'm gonna be using some paver base underneath. Now this is what I've used on my retaining walls and on my pavers before. This will work great to get a nice level, compact surface, and it will drain, and so we can get some more drainage right down there into the pit. And when you start getting close to the top, you want to start screeding it and leveling it a little bit. I'm going to use this 2x4 and I'll screed it a little bit and then tamp down. And then we can start checking with the level and see where we need to add things and make sure we're level all the way across. I'm going to bring in the 4-foot level, and we slope down this way, so I'm imagining this side is going to be a little bit higher. And as I look at that, it is. So what I'm going to want to do is take the paver base up so that it's even with the ground here on the shallow end, and then that way we'll be a little bit buried here. So it looks like I probably need to add another inch over here on this area, and we're actually pretty good here to make it level with the ground. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, tamp it down, and then we'll move on to the bricks. And it's raining again. Susan's up on the deck with the camera. We've actually got sunshine and rain and shade all at the same time. So this is what DIY projects are like, just so you know that it's not all easy and fun. We're gonna press on. We'll maybe do some filming from up there. I'm gonna keep going. All right, the rain finally stopped and we are level. Now to check your level, you can just go around, since it's a circle, and just check it in different spots all around. And if it's level, then you're good to go. Also, you probably saw me using this, but getting a 2x4, it works great as a screed, so you don't just jack up your level, but you can use that to screed, put it on the level section, and then just kind of rotate it around in the areas that need to be lowered. And that'll just distribute the paver base nice and easy. So now I can start laying the paver stones, and I'm going to start in with my first layer, and the tools I'm going to use are a dead blow mallet. This is a lot better than just a regular rubber mallet because it won't bounce off the brick, as well as a couple of levels. Probably won't use this one much. A 2-foot level is a lot better because you got more surface area. Now because I rolled these bricks out to remove them, I'm just going to roll them back in, and they should be in that same spot that I put them in before. You can also put the fire ring in here and build it around it, but I think this will work great. Okay, so I'm just going to roll this one in back to where it was before. Scooch it up. I'm going to put in the next one, and then we can start leveling them off each other. Now since we've leveled everything and these have a flat bottom, this should be pretty straightforward, and hopefully they should be level already. So this one's just a little high. There we go. Then you can also check them from front to back to make sure they're level. With these tumble stones, it's a bit harder because you've kind of got a rough surface. There's not a lot to focus on here. There we go. Now as you're leveling these, you can just remove some of the paver base underneath if it's a bit too high, and add some if it's too low. As I'm getting around to this last paver here, it doesn't quite fit in there, so I probably need to widen the circle a little bit here, and I'm just gonna adjust some of these, look for any gaps, and then I think we'll be okay. And that is looking nice. All right, now the easy part, we just stack around the rest of them. If the ring's a little bit too tight, you can just adjust these out. Sometimes you put them too much inside and then that last one won't fit, so you can just adjust them outwards just a little bit, and that'll make enough room. For the second row is lining up the middle and the seam underneath. And so on the third row, we're gonna just go back and look at that seam down here and just mirror it for the top one. And then all the seams will line up and it'll look a lot nicer. I'm not using landscaping adhesive to put these blocks together like I did with my retaining wall, and that's mainly just because I do plan on coming back and adjusting this later, because I think I'm going to be doing that smokeless fire pit. You guys let me know down in the comments if you want to see me do that, but I'm leaning that way, so I don't want to lock them in so I can't move them. So I'm just going to work around. But these are a little wobbly on the top just because we're stacking them on top of this uneven surface. But as soon as we get these in and I put the fire ring in, that's going to help lock everything together, even if I don't use the adhesive. This thing is turning out awesome. Now this is with 3 stones right about 12 inches high. So you can see as far as the fill that you'll need inside, with that 6-inch ring, you would need 6 inches of stone in there. But with our 10-inch ring, we'll only need 2, and that gives you more space for the fire. So let's put the ring in and see what it looks like. All right, now this fire ring is pretty heavy, so this is really gonna help lock together that top layer when I put it in. So this does a pretty decent job of contacting the stones and keeping them from moving, and so that's gonna help when I don't have the landscaping adhesive in. Now I'm gonna fill in around the sides with some landscaping rocks. I'm gonna use these same river pebbles here. This is a calico stone to go around the side, and it matches what we have right over there in the garden bed. Let me give you a final cost breakdown and a few final thoughts while I'm starting a fire. One of the things I would definitely do is mortar together the rocks or some type of landscaping adhesive that's fire resistant, because these are just a little too wobbly. I really wish I had a solid piece fire ring. If I could find one that was 10 to 12 inches deep, I would definitely upgrade to that one. As far as the cost breakdown goes, we had $90 in the stones, another $85 for this insert. We had 6 bags of the paver base, 3 bags of the landscaping stones, and 2 bags of the rocks for 11 bags total, or an additional $55. So all in, we were able to do that for $230 before tax and a day's worth of labor, or 2 if you count the rain. So I want to convert my fire pit into a smokeless fire pit design. They actually sell commercial versions of smokeless fire pits, and the most popular version is the solo stove. But the way the solo stove works is there's actually an outer liner here, and then there's also an inner layer where the fire goes. And that leaves this space in between where the air can flow. So air comes in through these sets of holes right here, and then they show this on the picture, and most of it goes in here in the bottom and goes up to the firewood, and that just is the primary ignition and spurs the fire. But at the same time, some of that air is going to flow up this chamber, and as it's going up, it's going to get heated, and then it's going to come out of these series of holes up here. And that is going to provide air flow to the top of the fire. Now, of course, the fire pit that I've built looks nothing like that, and it has a primary base of stone. And then we have a steel insert fire ring. So the first thing we're going to do is remove some of those bricks around the bottom, and that's going to allow the cold air to come in just like on the solo stove. Now, some air will then come in straight from the bottom up into the firebox, and then the rest of it is going to be coming up here. But we need a place for it to come out at the top, so we need some of those holes. I've got the fire ring set up on the bench, and I'm hoping that this is a good setup to drill it in. I think I'm going to drill from the inside. But it kind of looks like just like an interdimensional portal. Like I just reach in there and pull out. Nice. I want to evenly space out the holes. I'm going to use this blue tape so that I know the exact distance of it with the blue tape. Now I can take it off, put it on a flat surface, make my measurements, and then put it back on, and it just makes it really easy instead of trying to get a tape measure in on this curved surface and mark everything. Now I can just use the center punch on there, and that'll get me a good start for drilling my holes. So we've got this first section laid out for the holes, and it's going to have 15 of the 1/2 inch holes, and those are going to be spaced at 1.5 inches. Now at the bottom, I'm actually going to be doing some supply holes, and those are going to be spaced at 3 3/4 inches, and I'm going to have 6 of those. So it should give the fire a lot of air on the bottom, as well as provide that secondary combustion air up at the top. At least that's the theory. All right, that was a ton of drilling, but I installed it and it looks great. I also sunk down the paver to be flush with the stone, so we're gonna get some good airflow at the bottom. I went ahead and I put a layer of mortar around the top of the ring because there was a little bit of smoke escaping, and we're gonna go for it, see if we can really get a smokeless fire and see if we can get those superheated flames coming out of the side. Let's see what we can do. All right, it's starting up. Here we go. We are about a half hour in now, and this thing is putting out almost no smoke. Now, the only thing left to do is shoot some flames out of the side. Let's go for it. I'm just gonna chunk wood on until it melts through the earth. Oh, that is totally it! Look at that. Oh man, flames coming out. That is so fantastic. All right, guys, I'm chalking this one up as a huge win. I am so pleased with how this turned out, and most importantly, almost no smoke. I did call out some pricing there in the fire pit, but we didn't include some of those things to make it smokeless. So it's going to be added a little bit extra in there. So total materials, $308.22, and the tools, $74.95. And that's really just the tamper and the level here. So a total of $383.17. If you look what a contractor might charge, it could be around $1,398.88. So a total savings of $1,015.71. So the total cost for all 7 projects was $3,040.34. And if we had have paid a contractor to do that, it would have come in at a whopping $16,093.73 for a grand total savings of $13,053.39. And that's why we do things ourselves. Another awesome outdoor project is building a shed, and I built a 10 by 20 lean-to. I got the video queued up for you right there to show the entire process. I'm Brad. Until next time, get out there and build something awesome.